get into it. I believe we've got Alex Skinner here as well. I'm sure everyone knows Alex is independent director of CCHL, and obviously Paul Munro, chief executive. Everyone will know that the council directors are sitting back for this. So Andrew, James, Leanne, and Sarah, who I think, she might be upstairs. So what I'm keen to do is, obviously we left it laying on the table at F&P a couple of weeks ago. I'd just like, perhaps, Alex, do you want to run through a bit of the SOI process stuff? And then Paul, can you just touch on anything you think is pertinent? And then we'll move to questions, obviously realising that Yanni had amendments last time. I think Melanie had an amendment.
Yeah, but
and I don't know whether, Mike, there was anything you wanted to raise. Yeah, okay. So let's go with, do you guys want to talk us through it, sort of, at a high level, and then we'll move through?
Yep. Yeah, so thank you. So just from a statement of intent process, obviously it's an accountability document that's owned by the board of each of the subsidiaries. The content itself is governed by the Local Government Act and covers matters like activities, governance process, KPIs, both financial and non-financial, but it doesn't cover strategic plans and it doesn't cover business plans, and that's quite intentional. As shareholders, as CCHL shareholders of subsidiaries and council as shareholder of CCHL, we have the ability to influence the content of the statement of intents, and we can do that through our letter of expectations, which we issue to the subsidiaries and which council issues to us. And also through council meetings and the questions that you raise and pose to us as the ultimate shareholder of the subsidiaries. One of the challenges as commercial entities our subsidiaries have is balancing their commercial expectations versus community expectations. And I can assure you that feedback that we get from council is shared with our subsidiaries, and to the best that they possibly can, they do bring in as many of the community aspects as they can into their statements of intent and the activities that they undertake. So the process that CCHL has gone through, we issued our letter of intent back in December, a robust discussion at the board as to what we anticipated the council will want, and therefore what we were expecting of our subsidiaries. The subsidiaries take that letter of expectations, they develop their statement of intent, they sent us a draft back in March. We then go through a detailed review, which initially is done by CCHL management and then robustly discussed at the board. We consider what was in previous statements of intent. We consider what's happening in the sectors at the moment, what we think the entities should be doing in the future, what KPIs they've identified as being accountable against for the future, and then we provide our feedback back down to the subsidiaries once we've got feedback from you as councillors as well. So I suppose that's the process that we've gone through. We've provided quite a detailed covering letter to the statements of intent, where we've analysed back to your original letter of expectations and where we feel the statements of intent cover those points off. There are a small number of gaps, but overall we're very comfortable with this, where the statements of intent have got to. We've had the opportunity a couple of times in workshops with yourselves to talk through some of the issues which we think are top of mind for councillors. And what I might do is ask Paul just to talk through 5 of those particular issues in this environment.
Very good. Look, thank you everybody, and thank you Alex for that overview. Look, just touching on the sort of 4 or 5 key areas that we have talked about over the last period. CEO remuneration, appreciate the messaging around that, and you'll have noted in the draft CCHL statement of intent that we have endorsed expectations around the need to show restraint, and we have encouraged reporting from our subsidiaries and continuing to work towards narrowing the gap between the highest and lowest remuneration levels. So that commitment is there in the draft statement of intent for your feedback. Living wage, again, we've had several discussions around that over the last several years. I think hopefully through those discussions you'll appreciate some of the commercial challenges around the living wage. Ultimately, to the extent that a living wage introduces an ultimate cost to a business cost to a commercial business and a commercial activity, that cost ultimately will come back to council. in some way, shape or form, either through reduced dividends or a direct cost to council. So balancing that against the imperative around supporting our communities and working towards a living wage is part of the challenge for our subsidiary boards. And in the draft SOI, we have undertaken to show an active improvement in continuing to work towards the living wage. It's going to be one of these challenges that we may never fully address because the living wage will keep moving over time, I suspect. In terms of development Christchurch, there's been some questions around that. Obviously, you'll appreciate it was operationally wound up at the end of last year, October, November last year. And we are in the process of working with Christchurch NZ and Christchurch City Council in relation to the pathway and the continuation of the asset realisation process in relation to those development Christchurch assets, and what that means in the context of Christchurch NZ's future role around urban development. And so there's work ongoing around that. That work will continue post 30 June, but will reach a landing hopefully not long thereafter. In terms of sustainability targets, the CCHL board in particular have taken quite a strong leadership position around sustainability in a very positive way. You'll see the references in the draft SOI to developing group targets and working towards group carbon neutrality by 2030. The intention to take a group approach is not to mask any individual company performance. Individual companies will have their own targets in addition to the group approach. But the real benefits of a group approach, there's probably a number of dimensions to it that are worth highlighting briefly, but it does encourage real strong collaboration across the group. So there's a lot of sustainability capability within the individual subsidiaries. And we had six members of the sustainability teams in our boardroom this morning, and I spent some time with them this morning actually working through some of the collaborative discussions that they're having at a group level to actually share perspectives and share insights and share common approaches to addressing the climate change challenges that we've all got. And we think that group approach is much more effective to avoid duplication and achieve the best outcomes. We think that's a much better approach than working individually in silos. And I think it does also recognise that group target approach. It does recognise the reality that in some cases our subsidiaries may not be able to fully eliminate all emissions, while at the same time some subsidiaries may be able to be carbon positive in time. And I think that recognition is going to come through the group work that we're doing across the CCHL team. And I think finally it's worth noting that there is a requirement under the TCFD regime, the Task Force for Climate Change Financial Disclosures, that creates reporting obligations on certain entities, including CCHL and Christchurch Airport. Not all of our subsidiaries, but CCHL and Christchurch Airport have obligations coming up in relation to TCFD reporting because we are listed issuers. And for CCHL in particular, in order to meet those reporting obligations under the TCFD reporting regime, we do need to be working together with the group because ultimately we're reporting a group position in relation to our climate change approach. And then finally, in relation to Christchurch Airport and their Central Otago proposal, I think the key message there that we've shared with you previously is that as we sit here today, we're well aware of the status of the proposal in relation to Central Otago land that's been acquired by Christchurch Airport. As we sit here today, there's no decisions to be made in relation to that project by either Christchurch Airport, CCHL or Council. There are a number of work streams underway that we've shared publicly and that the airport's shared publicly, and those work streams will play out over a period of time. And as the work streams play out, there'll be information developed that will actually address some of the comments and questions that have been asked. But as we sit here today, that information needs to be worked up so that we can actually properly respond to the questions that are rightly being asked. And so I think that's really where that project sits. So that's in the future discussion to be had, and one that will keep an active engagement around. So I think, Sam, those were the 5 key areas that I'm aware of that we've talked about over the last few weeks. But
yeah, sure.
Happy for you to open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Paul, and Alex as well. I think that's given us a really good overview to start things off. Now, so there's a council resolution there around noting it 1, 2 and 3.
Some questions.
And there are questions, and obviously as well. But I'm just signalling that I'm keen to move that, and I know Catherine Chu will second it. So I'm just putting that out there now. And then we can have amendments in that as we want to play it out. So what we'll do first is go around with questions, and I'm keen to give everyone a fair bite of the cherry, so I don't want people to take up too much time. So we'll start with Pauline.
Thank you, and thanks for outlining those 5 important points so well. Just a devil's advocate question here. When you're looking at dealing with your emissions targets as a group approach, is there any one group that you are perhaps trying to protect? Say, for instance, if the airport was to go and do something that was going to increase their emissions, is that what you're trying to protect, or is
No, no, good question, Pauline. No, we're not trying to protect anything or anybody at all. We're quite deliberately working as a group, because the whole group acknowledge, in fact, corporate New Zealand acknowledge that they need to respond to climate change in a positive, proactive way. And the real drivers to working at a group relate to our reporting obligations, which are at a group level, but also the benefits that we can get by working at a group. You know, there were, as I say, 6 people in our boardroom this morning who've all got really strong capabilities and experience around helping corporates address climate change, and sharing those perspectives and working together is going to achieve much better outcomes than trying to solve the problems individually. So there's no one we're trying to protect at all.
And it's fair to say that currently the Christchurch Airport has got a very good rating as far as their sustainability rating goes.
Yeah, Christchurch Airport, as you're aware, was the first, or one of the first airports in the world to achieve a global certification around climate reduction, the ACI Level 4 accreditation that they achieved last year. They were first, they claimed first, but probably first equal with Dallas in relation to their climate activity or climate reduction activity, carbon reduction activity. So they are a market leader, they're a global leader, and because of that, through that recognition, there's airports around the world reaching out to them, looking to have Christchurch Airport share their experiences with other airports in relation to what they've done to positively address the climate challenges that they've got as an airport.
And just one more quickly, that if things should change in the future, because as you say, this is a very, very long-term projection, it's not going to happen anytime within the 10 years at least, and maybe way out longer. If things were to change so that it was no longer feasible or viable for CIAL to build another airport, they have enough other pots on the boil in their property portfolio to not need to go down that track, perhaps.
Yeah, correct. And look, they had to be really clear, they have not made a decision to build an airport in Central Otago.
Right, thank you.
They've made no decisions
in
that regard.
Great, thanks, Pauline. Melanie?
Following from that, you said before that, working as a group for climate change emissions, you said some subsidiaries may not be able to meet the emissions targets individually, whereas some might be in the positive. Do you have any idea which subsidiaries would be which? Yeah, look, it's a fair question. I think Orion's a good example. The electricity industry as a whole, effectively because of the way the laws of physics work, electricity is lost as it is distributed across electricity lines, and inherently that has a carbon footprint attached to it. And the ability to solve that requires the ability to change the laws of physics. And so Orion are doing some fantastic things in relation to areas they can control, but in relation to areas they can't control, there's inherently going to be some challenges there that can't be met directly, need to be met indirectly through sequestration, offsets, and the like.
Can I ask one other question? Regarding the airport, if we were to be looking at each individual, at its emissions targets as a business, would that include emissions related to the planes that are coming in that are not obviously owned by the airport itself?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, Anne.
Kia ora and thank you. I want to thank you too for the terrific briefings and workshops that you've presented to us in terms of the living wage and the complexities that are involved with that, and also CEO remuneration. But I'm wondering, what reassurance can you give us that you're working to narrow the gap between those on the lowest wage with those being paid at the top rate?
Yeah, as I said, Anne, I think The messaging has been consistent and consistently reinforced both formally and informally. So formally through letters of expectation that we send to the subsidiaries, informally through the chair-to-chair engagement that does take place at a board level across the CCHL board and the subsidiary boards. I think the other dimension to it to highlight that needs to be acknowledged is that employment decisions are not made by CCHL. The CCHL don't employ the CEOs, CCHL don't employ the teams of people that work across the subsidiaries. They are employed by the individual subsidiaries at an operational level. So we have the opportunity to influence and take that opportunity very seriously, and are very consistent around the way we try and influence the right outcome in that regard. But we're not the decision maker per se.
I'll just add that also through the reporting regime, we're looking to get more formal reporting on the highest and lowest. So whatever you report and measure and gets reported gets a focus as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. I just wanted to check at a high level if the CCHL as a group was to offset the carbon impact of the air travel, the international air travel in particular, what would be the price of that?
I honestly don't know. I'm not able to answer
Yanni,
that.
we've already heard that doesn't fall within the reporting requirements of their emissions trading.
But in terms of the wider issue for the city and the country, it's pretty significant.
I don't want to get into it, they're a commercial investment arm.
Yeah.
The
So, I mean, my
legislation
calculation
isn't
it would be
in that
about,
respect.
I think it's 500,000 tonnes of carbon from the international air travel. So offsetting that, depending on the price, would be about $25 million a year, which would be pretty significant.
I haven't done the calculation, Yanni, I'm sorry.
Paul, it's not a relevant question.
Okay. Can I ask, in terms of the senior executive remuneration restraint that we've put in our statements of intent and our letters of expectation for at least several years now, what restraint has been shown? Are you able to show us or explain to us what the trend has been and how we've seen any restraint?
Yeah, I think we spent some quite good time end of March, early April in a workshop around that, and we shared at that workshop some data over the last 5 years which benchmarked the CCHL Group CEO REM against a market index of CEO REM. And within that data set over the last 5 years, I don't have the data in front of me, but from memory, the CEO REM at the CCHL Group level had increased about 3% a year on average, and that was very similar to the benchmark data that we referred to in that discussion. So at a trend level, I think there's evidence that restraint is being shown, albeit it needs to be restraint within a market context.
Right, and does it concern you that in the agenda that we've got, when we look at on page 48, that when we go through both the executive remuneration and the living wage targets or areas that were asked for, that if you go through it, executive remuneration, no specific targets, no comments, no specific targets, no specific targets, no specific targets, no specific targets from our companies, and likewise with the living wage. But 2 of them have no comment, 1 has TBC, and there's 1, I think, that has a stated target, and there's 2 that have a stated minimum and commitment. But does it concern you that really around executive remuneration, our companies are not setting clear enough targets to show restraint and a reduction?
Yeah, I think the point of highlighting that in the report was to highlight the fact that we are going to feed exactly that concern back to the subsidiaries and request that they do include appropriate commitments and statements within their final SOI to address those aspects.
Right, and just to be really clear, in regards to the statement of intent, as a as the key shareholder, we are able to provide feedback on the statement of intent on issues, strategic issues.
In relation to, exactly, as the shareholder, we can provide comments on the draft statement of intent.
Yeah, so there'd be nothing stopping us from passing a resolution today that provided feedback on the strategic direction in regards to the airport around Terrace.
Well, the strategic direction is not set out in the statement of intent. So commercial strategy is not a statement of
Part of
intent
it.
matter. That's a matter for the company to manage at a board and management level.
I just wonder, Paul, that question you had before, could you just clarify, just for probably Yanni and the wider audience's benefit, you talked about 75% ownership. Who is the shareholder of that? Is it CCHL or is it the council?
CCHL is the shareholder and the Crown hold the other 25%.
Sure. Yep, thank you. Yanni, have you got more questions? No.
I know when we've previously discussed the living wage being applied to our contractors, one of the reasons we've been given is that it'll have a cascading impact on other businesses. But when we look at what's happening around New Zealand, we see major corporations like Westpac now and Auckland City Council now applying to the contracted cleaners and security guards the living wage. So I just was really interested to understand what the current thinking is within CCHL and its companies over how we could actually look at the living wage for our contractors, given that previously we haven't seen those developments, but in the recent 12 months we are seeing a move towards contracted cleaners, security guards and others being applied the living wage. And so any thoughts on if we wanted to get the contractors within our companies onto a living wage, what the best mechanism was to do that?
Yeah, I think commercially it's quite challenging, as you've alluded to. I think we're trying to focus, as I understand Council are, on direct employees and getting direct employees to work towards a living wage over time. The challenges with contractors we've talked about previously, and we probably don't have time today to go into it. But I wouldn't say we can never get there, but I see it as commercially quite challenging, but something we're happy to continue to focus on if we can see a way through.
Thanks.
Great. Aaron?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just going on Yanni's point around the restraint or closing the gap is probably a better way to put it. That's a better corporate goal. Has there been work done rather than using the measurement of percentage increases, because that's what creates the inequity, because 10% of an elephant's a lot more than 10% of a mouse, as we all know. So just using a dollar amount, if a company's going to say put up salaries by $50,000 this year and you've got 50 staff, that's $1,000 per person, and applying it that way rather than going, we'll do it on a percentage amount, because the ones on the bigger number to start with are going to get even more of that 50 grand than the ones at the bottom get. Is there work being done to do it that way to close the gap?
This year I think will be the first year that we've actually included within the SOI a desire to look to close the gap, and the reporting in relation to that will potentially give us a bit more visibility around how some of the thinking at a subsidiary level works. As I said in relation to Councillor Galloway's question, they're not CCHL decisions, obviously, but I think as Alex alluded to, when we start reporting, you tend to manage what you report and you measure what you manage, or you manage what you measure, I should say. By measuring that gap, we'd like to think that there'll be more active management around it.
Right, so would you be, as a group, looking to do work on other ways of doing it other than just percentage?
Look, our focus is going to be to send the signal and encourage the right outcomes. We're not in a position to actively make the decisions, so we're not necessarily going to be actively directing or trying to tell the subsidiaries how to make employment decisions. That's not our role.
Right.
But our focus is to get the visibility of the information through appropriate reporting, and then encourage the subsidiaries to manage it appropriately to strengthen the outcomes.
Right, okay, thank you.
Are there any other? Oh, Pauline? Yep.
Just a suggestion, with your permission, with the...
Can we do questions first, and then I'll come to you?
Yes, okay,
as soon as
that's
we've done
great.
that.
Yep.
Jimmy?
Question is, back to the key questions, because our council particularly declared the climate and the ecological emergency in May of 2019. But even your subsidiary, the airport, have a kind of plan for investment in the Central Otago, those projects. but because we set up target based on our draft, the climate change is by 2030, all the council, the organization, and all the kind of subsidiary should be compliant and consistent with our criteria by the 2030. Those kind of carbon emission neutrality. But now we have this kind of investment. Even it's not in Christchurch, but it's kind of South Island, more or less, will create those carbon emission. So I just don't know whether that's consistent with our criteria or policy or declaration or not. And also how to fill the gap through the communication, between your subsidiary and all those affected community. That's a key question. Is my
Yep. So there's a couple of questions there. I think the first comment would be that any infrastructure actually that's developed anywhere in New Zealand in future needs to be developed within the constraints of the Carbon Zero Act. And any consenting process is going to need to properly consider the sustainability implications of new infrastructure development. And any potential development of a new airport in Central Otago would need to be developed consistent with those requirements. And there's multiple work streams underway to work through that process. And if and when we get to the point where there's decisions to be made, all of that information needs to be clearly worked through. But as we sit here today, that remains a work in progress. In relation to community engagement, there has been active community engagement in Central Otago by the airport, and we've had some discussions recently about increasing that community engagement with key stakeholder groups and community groups in Christchurch City, recognising that Christchurch is a key stakeholder in that process as well. So that's noted and acknowledged.
Great, thank you, Paul, for that. Yeah. So I think that's concluded. You got any questions, Mike? You're okay?
No, he's answered it.
Oh, yeah, perfect. You're good. Okay, so we'll close off those. Pauline, do you want to just make your suggestion?
So it's small, but in the number 3, the second to last line, such as future costs and the effect on council's commitment to climate change targets. I was wondering if it might be better to say such as future costs and something like the interface with the council's commitment or the synergy with the.
Well,
so it's kind of like more like
a good.
It's got to fit.
Yeah, no, great suggestion. I'm sure, Catherine, you're happy with that. Can we just change that, Joe? Well, yeah, thanks, Pauline. That's great. So we've got a mover and seconder for that, but what we'll do is we'll just wait for Joe. Can you scroll up? So Yanni's got 3. I just want to check with you, Yanni. Given the answers, I mean, a couple of them don't seem actually relevant now. Are you still wanting to put them, or even after the explanation that's already in the SOIs? Okay, all right, that's okay. Do you want? So have you got a seconder for those?
Yes, I wanted to move them separately. So
all 3 of them separately, or the first 2?
Yeah.
All 3 separately.
Yeah.
Can we do that, Joe?
With the agreement of you as the chairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
There needs to be a seconder for it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So split them up. Yeah. I mean, I thought we'd covered them off, but if Yanni wants to take up time, that's fine. So for A, have you got a seconder for that? Would someone like to second A?
Second.
Melanie will. Okay. For B, Jake will second B. Oh, yeah, sure. And for C, does he have a seconder for C?
I'll second it.
Melanie will second that as well. Okay. So Joe, the question's been asked: Can someone put more than one amendment?
I believe it's one amendment with those 3 motions, and if you want to put the 3 motions separately, there's nothing in standing orders that is against.
Right. Okay. So
it's one amendment. You're just putting each part of it.
Yes. What I'd be keen to do, though, Yanni, and I hope you'll
just speak to them as a group.
Indulge me on that.
Yeah.
It's just one debate rather.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
The idea was that there'll be some people that don't want to support all three or just one or two of the three. So
Yeah, you could have done that. Oh,
Yeah.
anyway.
Cool.
So I thought you've been here a long time. Okay, and then so if we can do those, if we can put those three in. Yeah. And can we just have it clear who's moving and seconding? Well, obviously Yanni's moving, but who's seconding them? Thanks, Joe. We'll just wait while that's done. I just want to get it right.
just Melanie, Jake, Melanie.
Missed that. Missed that. Yeah. Hopefully someone seconds it.
I think we're nearly there, aren't we? So can Melanie and Jake just check that you're comfortable with those, seconding those? You still happy, Melanie? Yep. No, I just want to make sure they're the right ones, so you're not... Yeah,
Excuse
doing
me,
those.
excuse me, Mr Chair, if Councillor Coker seconds them, she's not able to move a further amendment.
Okay, so what would you like to do, Melanie? So you'll withdraw that? Yeah, so we'll just withdraw that last amendment. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so what we'll do is...
Which one you withdrawing, sorry?
so stop for a sec, everyone. Mike's called a point of order.
Could we just check? I'm pretty sure that I understand what Yanni's trying to do by having them voted separately, but it has to be one amendment, so therefore it should just be one seconder with that, not two different seconders.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think there probably is correct, yes. Putting them separately is okay, but with the different...
right, so you actually need so you need Melanie to second all three. So you happy to do that? Jake, you happy to... Okay. Thanks, Mike. That's cool. See, Yanni, this would have all been resolved if we didn't put them separately. Okay. Good to go? Excellent. Okay, so what we'll do now, thank you, Paul and Alex, very much for your time and for coming in. I think it's actually been really useful, not only for us, but I think the wider audience watching as well, just to explain what you're doing. So now we'll move into debate. Joe, can you put the timer up, please? Right, so Yanni, I assume you want to start?
Thank you.
Well, I'd be keen to do the whole, I mean, I'd much rather debate the whole thing at once and then we'll just put it to a vote and see where it lands, rather than relitigating it time and time again.
Yeah,
so,
cool.
So this is debate on everything.
Yeah, so just to speak in favour of these amendments, just had the email response back from the staff that the CCHL Group CEO remuneration has increased 3.3% per annum over the last 5 years in comparison to the NZ Herald CEO pay survey. CEO remuneration for CEOs at the top of NZX listed companies increased 3.1%. These are public companies owned by the public, and the senior executive remuneration has gotten out of control. We need to take a stronger stand than what we've currently been doing, and I think it's incredibly disappointing to just consistently be told it's a matter for the companies, and that we need to pay people higher and higher to attract the talent necessary. We really need to take a strong stand on senior executive remuneration. People are being paid a huge amount of money compared to what the ordinary person earns in our society, and it's time that we addressed it. And I don't think you can address senior executive remuneration with the increase without considering what it means for the people at the bottom. Some of the people that have worked the hardest during the COVID-19 response have been security guards and cleaners. It is outrageous that those people, for some of our companies, are still not on a living wage. And all this is doing is asking, as part of the feedback, that it be considered both implementing the living wage within the next 12 months for direct employees and within 24 months for contractors. So this is feedback to a statement of intent. This is not directing the companies to do certain things. We cannot do that, and I understand that this is the process that we have. So I strongly urge you to support this. We are seeing a pattern around the world and around New Zealand of contracted people now being paid the living wage. Let us be at the front of that movement rather than at the end of it. It's only a matter of time before it happens, and I'd rather we, as the People's Republic of Christchurch, be a leader rather than a follower. And finally, I just want to touch on, again, giving feedback and raising concern at the strategic direction of CAL's proposal to build an airport at Terrace in both regards to cost and the climate change impacts. If you look at the CCHL statement of intent, it sets an objective that the group companies attain environmental, social and innovative performance objectives that are compatible with activities, commercial nature and other objectives. There's everything in the statement of intent to suggest that this is entirely appropriate that we raise concern if we have concerns about what's proposed at this stage of the process. I just want to touch on a few issues as I see them in regards to Terrace and the airport. We can talk about all the awards that the airport's won in terms of sustainability. Go and look at what's happened on their campus. Look at the McDonald's, look at the KFC, look at the overseas companies, the supermarket and the Bunnings. To me, that's not sustainability, not using local businesses, not using locally owned companies, developing a huge campus that, yes, it brings in revenue, but what is the cost locally? What is the impact locally? We know New Zealand has one of the highest rates of fast food outlets per capita in the world, and we also know we've got major obesity issues facing us, and we've also got major sustainability issues in terms of the way in which our food is produced. So I think we need to look at that and say that really we should be concerned about the proposal to build a massive new airport in the middle of central Otago, that there will be environmental impacts associated with it, especially when we've declared a climate change emergency. That's just putting aside the cost, and to be told that it hasn't cost the ratepayer anything of the city when we've got a huge amount of money being expended and are looking to still fix our broken roads and our water pipes following the earthquake, I think is the wrong priority. So I want to raise that concern today. I want to send a clear message to CCHL that there are serious concerns about the cost implications of the proposal of the airport at Terrace, and there are serious concerns about the impact on our climate change and sustainability. And as I said, I did a rough calculation based on the 500,000 tonnes of carbon being used for international travel, and to offset that, depending on the price, comes out to about $25 million per year. That is a massive cost to offset our carbon footprint, and it's not one I'm prepared to support.
Great. Would anyone else like to speak? Jake?
Yeah, I'll speak to the living wage element of this, which is to say that, of course, I'll be supporting this amendment. The council has spent years talking about implementing a living wage, but has thus far failed to actually do so. Sure, letters of expectation are the main way we direct our companies to implement our wishes, but we should. There's no reason we can't direct them via a comment in the statement of intent as well. So we need to be clear in whatever document that comes before us that we want a living wage and in what time frame our companies will need to implement it. Otherwise, it simply won't happen. The companies and the directors rightly have purely commercial aims, and it's our job to focus them on the triple bottom line. I guess kind of finishing where I started in terms of how long this has taken, simply talking about a living wage is just virtue signalling and actually paying it is making people's lives better.
Thanks, Jake. Would anyone else like to speak? Pauline?
Just briefly, look, Yes, I do. I do support setting targets. They're always good to have. So I'll support A. With B, I support CCHL considering these things that Yanni's requesting. So that's a good thing to do. We've already been told of the challenges of this, but I think further consideration is never harmful. With C, I'm a little bit torn with this one because I think we've basically addressed that in our number 3 resolution. I feel comfortable with that. There's so much unknown about this, and we have declared a climate emergency and we all agree with that, but the unknown with this is just we're just floundering around. We don't know what the intention is. We don't know what the future will bring. We don't even know if this project will go ahead. At the moment, we've got land acquisition. That's it. So I think we've got that covered on an expectation with climate change interface in number 3. So I won't be supporting C.
Yeah, look, thank you. I won't be supporting A. I think the decision to the boards, if we see extremely good management right at the top and what that can earn and save, I think that's a matter for the boards, and hopefully they will make the right decisions and they will pay better dividends on the good leadership. B, we had a presentation as councillors with regards to one of the companies. I thought that was excellent and how that's managed by that company and how that's going forward. So again, I think we'll leave, if the companies can work together as a family with regards to climate change, I think that is another way that these companies can work together to get leadership and look at the ways that you can get that equal and improved wages. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I know that from personal experience in my previous life. C, I will support C. I think it's just such a grey area, but I do think the government needs to show leadership in this and give direction to TAs and private, etc. It seems ridiculous that a government can have a look at climate issues and not show leadership with regards to that. Thank you.
Me.
Yeah, I support those amendments, particularly regarding the A. We can see those table, regarding to the CCHL subsidiary in response to our letter of the expectation. Looks like not any kind of subsidiary have set up specific figure regarding to the executive remuneration. I think should be, can set up those kind of target, give us. We play the governance, so we can review them more clearly. Then it's kind of commitment. Second one is long-term issue regarding to a living wage, particularly in Christchurch. We have suffering several times. Those disasters we can see over the past 10 years. So those kind of the low salary or low income, those kind of staff, they couldn't afford to look after their family and their kids, etc. So this one should be reasonable, particularly here. Still some of the subsidiary, I didn't see that they mentioned a TBC or no comments, etc. Last one is third one is particularly my concern, because at the moment it's still a long way to go. It's uncertainty, because still need to go through those land purchase, those validation, the planning, or consent and the construction. So lots of the uncertainty. So there's a bigger gap between the CCH or airport and also the affected community. How to the narrow those the gap. That's very important, crucial. We are all councillors, we should take a lead, to raise these issues. So I think at least the amendment 3, let's concern those the climate change, concern those the cost, whether it's reasonable. Particularly, we review all the community outcome. That's quite balanced. Social, cultural, economic, environment balance is not a focus on the economic only, etc. So I would like to support those amendments.
Thank you, Jimmy. Is it Aaron?
Yeah, at first glance, I was quite keen on supporting a couple of these, but reading the words closely, it gives me caution to vote in favour, because A has reducing senior level remuneration, not just holding or catching the others up. So reducing could potentially have the effects of causing a brain drain, where people would leave either this city or leave our country to go to other places for senior level jobs, which can have an impact. So if it was purely holding or catching up, I could have been supportive of. So that's slightly dangerous wording. Number B, I fully support the living wage aspect, but then trying to get the contractors to do it as well is quite hard, and it might go against your point of sustainability, because a contractor might just subcontract out some of their work to overseas workers, where you've got no control at all what they are delivering, and then just feed that back and through their contractor here. So undoing the sustainability part that you speak of or after here, Yanni. And then the third one around the Terrace Airport, I struggle with that one as well, because the wording again is proposed to build the airport in regard to the cost and climate change. We've had 3 really, really clear briefings that have shown us how, if that project goes ahead, according to what they're currently planning, it would have a clear reduction of carbon for New Zealand Inc. And one of the things that needs to be done for New Zealand is to think collectively, how do we reduce carbon, how do we locally reduce carbon, and if the Terrace Airport does deliver that, which the points that Pauline made may deliver, we don't know yet, but if it does, that would be the best way to go, is to reduce New Zealand total, not just kind of think, oh, you don't want it down there because it's an airport, because air travel will be here to stay, air freight will be here to stay, it will change, and the way that we fuel aircraft and all other transport around the world will change. In fact, that's where we should be putting our energy and our investment, is in what are those changes and how do we get there a lot quicker than still using carbon.
Melanie?
I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about. Regarding the airport, I mean, I think that the airport's done actually a brilliant job within itself to reduce emissions, and it's obviously the concern of everybody about the emissions of the planes that are coming in that we can't control, but we can think about what airports that we are building into the future. So that's all I'll comment there. On the remuneration, I mean, I understand the difficulty around paying contractors and the different types of businesses that we have and the competition we have across the country, but we could take a leading step towards a living wage there and actually put a firm line. I also think with senior remuneration, if we're paying high wages for people to do a good job, I would hope that those people would be doing a good job because they feel that that's the right thing to do, not because they're getting paid a high wage. So I think asking people to reduce that is actually a very good idea, and so I wholeheartedly support it.
Anne?
Kia ora. So as a council, we talk an awful lot about equity, and I think that the A and B here is putting heat on really just walking the talk. So we need to be sure that our council-owned organisations are doing everything they can to bring equity into this situation. We're talking about a living wage. We're talking about what people need to live on in a relatively comfortable way. And so I'm very supportive of A and B. I think I agree with Pauline and her views on C. I think that we've been given clear information about this situation, and I don't think that what is being verbalised there or written there is actually helpful at this point. So I won't be supporting that.
Thank you. And James? Oh, sorry. Oh, cool. Yeah, Mike.
First of all, you know, I asked a couple of questions at the last meeting, and I'd like to thank Paul and Alex for answering them really, really well. And so I'll just focus, I guess, on C, tariffs. And I share the concerns raised about tariffs increasing aviation capacity and therefore emissions. However, if tariffs happens, it's probably going to be in a decarbonised environment, and potentially it may be better to have large groups of people flying into Central Otago instead of actually having individuals driving there by car. And we actually don't have enough information to make that kind of call today. But actually, I believe we actually have an opportunity to have meaningful impact through our next letter of expectation, where actually we can be more direct and be clear that our companies do not invest in projects that increase New Zealand's carbon emissions. I don't think today is actually the right time to be doing this. We need to do it actually through the proper process, and that's letters of expectations.
Kia ora, you just stole some of my thunder, but as colleagues around the chamber would know, that I'm very strong on the notion and the fact that we, as representatives, are the ultimate shareholders, as a body, as ultimate shareholder of CCHL. And I also note that 4 of our colleagues are on the board of CCHL, and I've stepped back for the moment. And I appreciate that one of the independent directors, Alex, has come today for this decision. And also the fact that we've had a lot of time, briefings where we've discussed and argued some of our points that we're talking about today. And we come to this point where we've appointed this board, 4 of our colleagues are on it, and I'm prepared to give them and rely on their responsibilities as a board to respond to our letter of expectation in an appropriate fashion. And I think that we've thrashed enough things out that we're at this point today where I'm comfortable with what you've put before us. One thing that I want to make a very strong point on, because there are people here today unhappy with the tariffs proposal. Thank you for making the point that today is not the day that we're going to make a decision. There's a long way to go, a long runway to go, if you like, before that decision is going to be made. I think it is important that those people who are opposed to the concept or the idea of another airport down that way, I think it's important that they have the ability to express their views, and they are today. One other thing is that the point's been made in briefings that sometime in the next 20 to 30 years, someone is going to build an airport there. And we've got to have a good think about whether we want it to be us, because we will miss out on some of the economic outcomes as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll just close it off very, very briefly. Look, these are always difficult situations, I think, because the nature of some of these amendments do inflame a certain narrative. And don't worry, I've been guilty of doing amendments like this myself in the past. But the reality is, I think we need to be very clear on why we're here today. It is not to decide whether or not we're building an airport in Terrace, and I think James and Mike have made that point really, really clearly. We're here setting direction from the council to our council and organisation. There's quite rightly a political buffer that sits within that, so that they can derive a good value while balancing the social good in the city. I think they achieve that very, very well. And looking at these amendments, I think they don't necessarily capture what's already in the statement of intent. So I am slightly concerned at that approach. I think, if we were to go down this path of being very specific, very deliberate, we could be at risk of being called the Kremlin. And I say that because we genuinely have good people outside of this organisation in the commercial world who can make these calls. We're not making a decision today on tariffs, and it's unfortunate that the debate has become about that. I think everyone acknowledges that climate change is an issue that is being worked through. The point has been made in briefings time and time again. We've had workshop after workshop after workshop on it. Any development that occurs in this space will have to comply with the legislation of the government. And so I just don't buy the narrative, quite frankly, that we can sit here today and effectively try and erode the value in one of our companies. I think it would be really disheartening to send a signal like this. So I think that the original resolution with point 3, acknowledging the need to keep us in the loop as these things are worked through, we'll send a really good signal to the city that we're aware of the issues and we'll work through them in time. I think probably the other good thing, and I know the Mayor and the Chief Executive have talked about it offline as well, is the need to better communicate with the ratepayers of Christchurch. And I think if we can do that, not only with Terrace, but our entire operation, people will be more fully informed and I think more understand where we're coming from. So it's really unfortunate that this has become a beat up over Terrace today. That's not what this item is about in the slightest. It's about setting the direction for our parent company, for our group company that looks after a group of subsidiaries. And I think it would be really dangerous today if, like I say, we became like the Kremlin where we dictated everything. We can send a signal. A lot of it's already been captured. And so I'd really hope that people wouldn't support the amendments, but accept the fact that we've done the groundwork already and a lot of this stuff is already in motion. So with that, I'll close the debate and we'll put the amendments first, one by one. I think what's going to be easier is, Joe, if you don't mind, just do a division on each one. Yeah. So we'll put A first.
Councillor McDonald?
No.
Councillor Johansson?
Yes.
Councillor Galloway?
Yes.
Councillor Daniels?
No.
Councillor Coker? Yes. Councillor Chen?
Yes.
Councillor Scandrich?
No.
Councillor Kewen?
No.
Councillor Davidson?
No.
Councillor Cotter? Yes. Councillor Chu? No.
About what you'd expect.
So it's tied. So the motion is not carried.
Okay, so that motion's not carried. If you can go to B, please.
Councillor McClellan?
Yes.
Councillor McDonald?
No.
Councillor Johansson?
Yes.
Councillor Galloway?
Yes.
Councillor Daniels?
No.
Councillor Coker? Yes. Councillor Chen?
Yes.
Councillor Scandrich?
No.
Councillor Kewen?
Go on. Go on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you go to C, please?
Councillor McClellan?
No.
Councillor McDonald?
No.
Councillor Johansson?
Yes.
Councillor Galloway?
No.
Yes.
Or 8. The motion is lost.
Great, that motion's lost. Okay, so can we go to the substantive? Yeah. Obviously acknowledging B carried, didn't it? Now on that, Joe, can you just clarify, we wouldn't put 4 separately again, would we?
No.
No, so it's just, we'll just vote on the... Yeah, I would like to put 4 separately. So, again, actually I will. Can I put 4 separately?
If it becomes a substantive motion, so yes, with the same principle.
Yep, okay.
Split it.
All right, so... Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go through the whole thing, but if we'll put 1 to 3, all in favour? Against? That's carried. Item 4, all in Item 4, all in favour? Against? No. Can we just have them recorded? I don't know. So it's, yeah, so it's only literally Catherine, myself, and Tim. Yeah. Okay, that motion is that motion's carried. Excellent. Hey, thank you very much, Paul and Alex, for coming in. I do appreciate that. And Leanne, you're back in the chair.